You know, inevitably during a service, someone has to use the bathroom. That's why we put them in synagogues. And if you walk to a bathroom in pretty much any synagogue, you'll find a rack or a shelf or some hooks where you're supposed to place your talit, your prayer shawl. Now, some of that is just common sense, right? It's not a good combination, but even if you were the most coordinated, graceful person in the world who could separate fringe from fluid, you still wouldn't do it because it would just feel wrong, right? Like you don't take something sacred into a bathroom. We feel it on a gut level, and that feeling is codified in this week's Torah portion. But before I get to how it appears in the Torah portion, I want to tell you a story. Two chassids, two pious men, were arrested by the Tsar's guards. And they were taken to a dank prison cell. Inside the cell were two moldy pallets and a bucket. The bucket was not full of water. One chassid began to weep, and the other began to hum a joyful nigun. The chassid who was weeping said to his friend, "How can you sing at a time like this? Don't you know the halakha, the Jewish law? You can't pray within 4 amot, 4 feet of excrement or urine. How can we serve God in this tiny prison cell?" And his friend replied, "Aha, but we can serve God by not praying. You see, if we are following the halakha to not pray, then we are serving God." And the sad chassid became joyful, and he too started humming. And before they knew it, they were singing and clapping, and they start dancing around this bucket. Now, the prison guard hears this ruckus, and there will be no joy in his gulag. So he comes over, he says, "What is all this noise?" And the chassids say, "We are praising the bucket." And the guard says, "Not on my watch." And what do you think happens next? He removes the bucket, at which point the two chassids pray Mariv. Of course, right? Of course. There is holiness. There are ways to encounter the sacred presence of God in the least expected places. In this week's Torah portion, chapter 23, verses 13 through 16, we read about using the bathroom in a war zone. "Further, there shall be an area for you outside the camp, where you may relieve yourself. With your gear you shall have a spike, and when you have squatted, you shall dig a hole with it and cover up your excrement. Since the Lord your God moves about in your camp to protect you and to deliver your enemies to you, let your camp be holy. Let him not find anything unseemly among you and turn away from you." The situation in war is filthy both physically and spiritually, but we are commanded by the Torah to do what we can to stay clean and pure. Each soldier is instructed to relieve himself outside of the camp and issued gear that enables himself to bury excrement in a healthy way, except the Torah is not emphasizing hygiene, although I'm sure that was important. The Torah gives this as the reason why we take care of the camp. Since the Lord your God moves about in your camp to protect you and deliver your enemies to you, let your camp be holy. It's not about hygiene. It's about finding God's presence, even in a place that we think is God-forsaken. I hope none of us are ever in a prison cell or a war zone. But if we are, the Torah tells us what to do. We have to act as if we feel God's presence until through the dignity of our actions, we notice that no place is devoid of God's sanctity. Shabbat Shalom.